Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Tan Xiao Chin, and I'm moderating the second YouTube session of the 9th International Women's Day edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 13 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. We'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later in this session. You can find out more about the Pixel Project by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Now, we have a very special guest for today's live Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session, the awesome romance author, Therese Beharrie. Hi, Therese. Welcome to Read for Pixels.
Hello. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So Therese is a South African author of several acclaimed romance novels who takes pride in writing diverse characters and settings. Her books are often recommended for their heart and banter. She lives in Cape Town with her husband, her inspiration for every hero, and her two adorable baby boys. Now, aside from spending time with us here today, Therese has also generously donated 2 super exclusive goodies to the stash of author treats we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. The first one is Therese Beharrie's Ultimate Paranormal Romance Bundle, US donors only. Therese is offering a very special bundle to one generous donor in the United States. And they are one unsigned paperback of And They Lived Happily Ever After. There you go. One unsigned paperback of A Ghost in Shining Armor. One handwritten and signed personalized note to the donor. And just to note, as Therese lives in South Africa, where postal services are unreliable, she will be scanning the note and sending it to her editor in the US to print out to send to the donor together with the books and the additional thing, one bonus story about the couple, Gaia Anders and Jacob Scott from And They Lived Happily Ever After. Now, the second bundle, which is Therese Beharrie's ebook starter bundle, is available to one generous donor anywhere in the world. And this is great if you haven't picked up any of Therese's books yet, or you want to introduce someone to her work. So do go and get her One Day to Forever series, which includes, there you go, A Wedding One Christmas, One Day to Fall, and One Last Chance. And all these titles are available in EPUB format. Now, please do give generously before the fundraiser ends on April 15th. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. Now, if you're watching this session on YouTube right now, you will also be able to ask Therese questions live. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Regina, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Therese to answer. And now over to Therese. What will you be reading for us today?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to be reading from my book called The Millionaire's Redemption, which is actually the third book I wrote, which was quite early in my career. And it's essentially a book about a woman who is fighting for her confidence and her sense of identity and self-love after being in a toxic relationship. So obviously that is probably why, it probably makes sense to you why I chose it, because I think, with the theme of today's, of the Read for Pixels project and the Pixel Project is to try and sort of highlight violence against women. And I think sort of these things happen in small ways and in big ways without us being aware of it. They're so permissive in our society. So I just wanted to choose something that was relevant to that. And the excerpt that I've chosen actually really illustrates the consequences of being in an abusive relationship. You tend to think really poorly of yourself, of your body image, your abilities. You berate yourself because that's the voice that just tends to come from the person you're in a relationship with, and you compare yourself. So that's really the things that I wanted to show in this extract. But in the book itself, as you go along, this extract comes from the beginning of this book. And as you go along in the book, it's actually a story about hope, because you actually follow the female main character as she finds herself again, finds her confidence, in her abilities and her body. And so I just really wanted to show that and highlight and make sure you know that it's a hopeful story over the book. And in this particular scene, she's about to come face to face with her ex-fiance, who was the abusive partner. And if that's something that's triggering to you, please do take a moment to step away just while I read this, and you can come back afterwards. But it is one of those maybe complicated or a little bit triggering situations where, she does display a lot of the things that I spoke about earlier. And because it's a romance novel, of course, we have a little bit of conflict in the sense that she then desperately sort of wants to get out of the situation and pretends to have a fake boyfriend. And we will see some of that as well. So, we have to make sure, it's a romance novel as well. So there are some of these things that are coming through. But yes, that's the extract I'm about to read. So
Yeah. Mm.
can I go
Okay.
forward and start?
Yeah. So to anyone who's listening and you feel that you might be triggered by listening to an abusive ex, you can step away, come back in maybe like 5 minutes, and which is when we'll get into the discussion with Therese. But do remember, it's a happily ever after, so it's not all bad. So do take it away, Therese. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So Lily stilled when she saw the man she was trying to avoid walking up the stairs. Kyle. His date, the other descriptions in her mind weren't quite as polite, was giggling as he whispered something into her ear. Lily had never bothered to learn the woman's name. Why would she need to know the name of the woman she'd caught naked in her fiance's arms? But she did remember the red hair and petite frame. It made her pull at the dress Caitlin had begged her to wear a few days ago. It was too tight, Lily thought desperately. She wished with all her might that it wasn't in a shocking red color that did nothing to hide the curves Lily had plenty of. Too many of, in fact. Her pretend confidence was already dwindling. And although there was a part of her that told her it was to be expected when she was about to face the man who had broken her down throughout the relationship, who had cheated on her, she had expected more of herself. It also did her no good to notice how much smaller than Lily Kyle's date was. She watched the man she had once thought she loved slide a hand around the woman's tiny waist, pulling her close enough that there was no space between them. They were sneaking away to fool around, she realized, nausea fierce in her stomach. How many times had she thwarted Kyle's attempts to do just that with her when they were at parties? He hadn't only found a woman smaller than her. She was also the risk-taker Kyle had always wanted her to be, and she would never be. In the split second before Kyle saw her, she decided to take a risk. She wanted Kyle to think that she had been making out with someone upstairs, that the thing she had refused to do with him, the thing he had found someone else for, she was now doing with someone other than him. She would probably think that this was a terrible decision later, but as she fluffed her coiled curls, she rubbed her lips together to smudge her lipstick. She hoped only one thing, that Nathan's brother had a sense of humor. Lily? Kyle's voice immediately sent her skin crawling and her heart galloping. She couldn't believe that she'd once found that voice attractive. Now she heard the slime curl around every word. She lifted her eyebrows. Kyle? I didn't see you there. How are you? The "of course you saw me" glint in his eyes set her teeth on edge and had a small part of her recoiling. I'm well. How are you? I heard you managed to get that bookstore up and running eventually. It's doing really well, actually. My initial investment was quite substantial, as you know. Kyle's eyes hardened and satisfaction pumped through her. But then it gave way to the usual feelings of disgust at the thought of how their relationship had ended, at how she'd compromised her integrity, her dignity. She ignored the fact that her self-confidence was deteriorating with every minute she spent in his presence. You've never met Michelle before, have you? At least not officially. Kyle pushed the woman forward. We're getting married in a few months. Congratulations, she answered, and though ice stiffened her spine at the woman's cold look, she felt nothing else at the news that Kyle was getting married. That didn't mean relief didn't wash over her when she heard footsteps behind her. Not even considering that it might be someone else, she spoke again. I didn't think you needed that much time to recover, honey. She turned around, and the words trailed off when she saw her supposed boyfriend for the first time. His skin was the color of coffee with cream, complemented by dark hair tousled in a style that made her fingers wish they'd been the ones to style it. His dark eyes were stormy, and she realized she had taken a massive gamble with this man. He was clearly still upset about the conversation he had just had. But the storm cleared immediately after that thought, and was replaced by a look of calm that made her feel even more uneasy. His eyes flickered over her, looked at Kyle, and then rested on her again. The calm transformed into interest. Amusement, too, she thought, with the faintest hint of some secret knowledge that made her skin heat. He looked nothing like his traditionally handsome brother. His face was made of rugged planes that suggested he had 1,000 stories to tell, and just above his mouth was a scar that she could imagine feeling during a kiss. When the sides of the lips she was admiring curved upwards, she flushed. He might not be traditionally handsome, but he sure as hell was sexy. Honey, you and Jacques, you're dating? Kyle interrupted her perusal, and Lily felt her tongue stick in her mouth when she realized that Kyle knew Nathan's brother. Jacques. You should have thought of that, Lily admonished herself. She knew that Kyle was here because Nathan worked in Kyle's family's law firm. Nathan loved his job and hadn't wanted to upset the prestigious Van der Rosses by not inviting the man who would one day become his boss. Her best friend had assured Lily that was the only reason her ex-fiancé had been invited. Yes, we're dating. The smooth baritone of Jacques' voice sent shivers down Lily's spine, and she struggled to shake the feeling. For how long? Kyle said, and she turned back to see the smugness disappear. It bothered him, she thought, her heart accelerating in an instinctual response to Kyle's anger. But then she paused and told herself she didn't have to be worried about him lashing out. She didn't have to worry about him at all anymore. Almost 6 months, she said, as Jacques moved down a step to stand beside her. He was a full head taller than she was, and she tried to ignore the awareness that realization brought. 6 months, Kyle repeated, and she saw his eyes flash. They'd broken up a year ago, and clearly he thought 6 months was too short a time for her to mourn. It doesn't feel like 6 months, though, Jacques said, and she shifted her gaze to him. I barely feel like I've scratched the surface with you. So he did have a sense of humor, she thought, and smiled. When he responded with a smile of his own, her breath caught, and she thought something crackled between them. Her heart thudded when Jacques wrapped an arm around her waist, and for a moment she forgot that it was all a game, and lifted her hand to brush at a piece of his hair. How did you two meet? Kyle's voice punctured the tension in the air, and she looked at him with a foggy mind. It took her a moment, but when she came out of her Jacques-induced haze, she noted the grim set of Kyle's lips. He really didn't like this, she thought, and waited for the panic. For that quick rush of trepidation that anticipated that she was about to be put in her place. But nothing came, and somehow she knew it was because of the easy strength exuded by the man at her side. I'd love to tell you about it, Kyle, but we were up there for far too long. Lily shot a flirtatious glance at Jacques and briefly wondered how deep a hole she was digging when she saw a flash of heat in Jacques' eyes. We should probably spend some time with a happy couple. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Taking Jacques' hand, she hurried down the stairs, weaving her way through the guests. She only stopped once they were outside on the balcony, and immediately she let go. I'm so sorry about that, she said hurriedly, her chest suddenly tight. Just breathe, Lily. It's over now. Care to explain? There was a slight breeze in the air, and Lily walked to the edge of the balcony, turning her face toward the wind. It helped steady her, and when she opened her eyes, when she saw the view in front of her, that did too. Nathan's new house stood at the top of the Tygerberg Hills in Cape Town, and she could see Table Mountain and most of the city where she was from. It reminded her of how small her problems were. even the after effects of a bad relationship. How about we start with an introduction? Her words were said a little breathlessly, and she cleared her throat. Nerves had replaced panic, and she glanced around. Nobody was paying attention to them. That helped. Lily Newman, best friend to the bride-to-be. She offered her hand. Jacques Brooks, brother of the groom-to-be. He took her hand, and it was like touching the coals of a fire. It made her want to break the contact immediately, but he held on, shaking her hand slowly. The heat went up her arm, through her chest. But before it could move any further, she moved her hand away. Nice to meet you, she said, and folded her arms, constraining the hands that suddenly wanted more of the fire. It probably would have been better if that had happened before the whole debacle inside. I don't know, he answered with a sly smile. It was much more interesting than the way I usually meet girls. I'm sure you must mean woman, because clearly, she gestured to herself and then flushed when she saw the appreciation in his eyes. But he only said touche and made her wonder why she'd said those words. They made her sound sassier than she was, as if she was in his league, as if she was used to playing the cat and mouse game of flirtation. She almost laughed aloud at the prospect of being in any league. No, she thought as she took in how effortlessly Jacques' muscular body wore his suit. He was way too attractive to be interested in her. Someone who looked like him spent time with models and actresses. Definitely not with women who had more than 25% body fat. She distracted herself by offering the explanation he'd asked for earlier. Kyle's my ex-fiancé. She broke off when he lifted her hand, and she saw that his ring finger was a little crooked. The one who dumped him a month before the wedding? Yes. I always thought that woman was courageous. She smiled. Thank you. It doesn't explain why you dated him in the first place. It was the same thing she'd asked herself when she realized how poorly he treated her. But that realization had only come at the end, when she'd been forced to see the truth. She'd been blinded by how charming, how handsome he was at first, and at all the times when he'd switched it on again sporadically throughout their relationship. But the simple truth was that the blinkers had been kept in place because he'd been interested in her. It had been intoxicating, until it hadn't been. And then she'd found him naked with a woman and regained the gift of sight. It had grown clearer with each hour that had passed after she'd ended it, with each phone call Kyle made, with each threat. She was ashamed that she dated a bully, that she would have married him, just because she didn't think enough of herself. She dealt with bullies her entire life. She should have known better. And then there was the guilt, the indignity of her actions after their breakup. Some things you only realize with time, she finally answered Jacques. Touche, he said again. That's it.
Oh, that was lovely.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah. So let's jump straight into the questions. As we can tell from Lily in that excerpt, your stories feature complex, resourceful, and compelling female protagonists. I mean, also including Gemma Daniels from A Ghost in Shining Armor and Gaia Anders from And They Lived Happily Ever, and they are all women with agency who do their best with the cards they are dealt with in life. So who or what are the inspirations behind your female characters?
I mean, I really look at the women that I know in my life, and I've grew up around women. I have 3 older sisters. I have so many aunts. I mean, I have good friends, mostly who are women. So I've seen a range of experiences with women, and that's really what I want to illustrate and represent in my books. I think women are complicated. I think the society that we live in, forces us to think of our existence in
Mm,
very intentional ways. And I just want to make sure that whatever women I write reflect that, and also that we have agency, as you said. That's the most
mm,
important thing to me. So whether or not that agency is in vulnerability, because I think it takes a lot of strength to be a vulnerable person, and to show your vulnerabilities, especially when you are falling in
mm,
love and when you are navigating difficult emotional situations. I just want to make sure that what I'm showing is a full experience of what we as women go through.
Yeah, great. And just to show Misty 306, hi Misty, she's one of our regular attendees. So she just said that was an excellent read.
Thank you. I was so nervous, so I'm very glad it came
Oh
across good.
no, you are great. And yeah, so jumping off your answer earlier, I mean, like any other genre, romance has its fair share of female stereotypes and tropes. And in addition, your stories focus on black female characters. So it's probably not a stretch to deduce that the risk of stereotyping is tripled when genre, gender, and race intersect. So, how do you break stereotypes to create distinctive black female characters with agency when dealing with the world around them, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women and girls, particularly with culturally prescribed gender roles for black women coming into play?
Well, obviously, as someone who is of color and has those experiences in real life, I can
Mm,
sort of draw on my own experiences, because there are obviously some stereotypical experiences that we have. They obviously stem from somewhere and they have a basis in reality. But
mm,
my job, or what I see as my job, is to always challenge that and to make sure that, what I'm engaging with is something that, yes, is based in reality, but also shows the consequences of it. So, for example, if you have something, if I do illustrate a stereotypical exchange in my books, I tend to try and show the consequences of that. So, what is the character thinking after that exchange? What is what is the consequences of that? How are they thinking about themselves, about the experience, moving forward? And also, I just want to make sure that because in the representation itself, I don't necessarily rely on stereotypes. I do
mm,
in exchanges often, because I think that's sort of natural in my own experiences, encountering
mm,
people who have set ideas about me, and who, knowing that when I enter a specific room, I have to sort of figure out what are the demographics, what is the dynamic in there, often what is the
mm,
power dynamics. I've often walked into
mm,
rooms, I am the minority, and so that's a
mm,
reality. And so
mhm,
I just always want to make sure that that's accurately displayed, but also that we are engaging with it, right? So to show my reader, this is actually, yes, this is something that happens often, and this is what someone who's actually going through it is thinking.
mm,
Obviously, it can be very narrow because it is often based on my own experiences, as writing often tends to be sometimes, especially with
mm,
emotional things. But I also do my research. I speak with my friends, and that's, I think, one of the benefits of having a diverse set of friends, is that you can draw on experiences and know that there are a range of experiences because you are engaging with people who've had that as well.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult thing. It's such a intricate balance, I think, to try and do that. But I think it's really important so that readers can recognize what they are going through themselves, if they can relate to the experience, but also find hope in the situation. Because I think if you can come out of the experience thinking about it differently, or, feeling stronger, or feeling
Mm,
more empowered, then that's my goal.
mm. Yeah, definitely. And so to jump off on a little bit of a tangent, but in a similar vein, many of your female characters can be seen as unconventional romantic heroines who navigate complex personal and familial issues. For example, Sophia Rue from One Day to Fall is described by her own sister as, quote, aggressive. And she can be quite prickly, grumpy, and blunt. Now, have you encountered any pushback from romance readers who aren't used to a more diverse range of heroines beyond the stereotype of the beautiful white heroine?
It's funny because I think, I find great pleasure in creating characters who are not conventional,
Hmm.
which is, I
Yeah.
guess, a little bit of contrariness on my side, because I think that it's such a wonderful thing to see complex people on page. So
Mm,
I tend to see what a stereotype is. Obviously, I'm a great reader of romance. I've read so many over the years growing up. I've read older romances where you see
mm,
much more toxic representations. I've read ones
mm,
that are out now, and thankfully, we've made a lot of strides when it comes to representation you know, in terms of race, gender,
mm,
sexuality. But we that whole range, I feel like I'm quite good at knowing what it is because I've read so many of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know I love taking something that you think you're going to expect and challenging it. So with Sophia in particular, she's one of honestly my favorite heroines just because I've been I it was one of those things where I think you have thoughts when you are a human being of
Mm.
how you like to treat someone, or when something happens you kind of have an instinctual reaction and then you pull back because you think, oh no, this is not how I'm supposed to act. Sophia doesn't have that. She is one of those people who are the most authentic that she can be. So
Mm.
she is herself unapologetically, and that forces her to engage with people in very different ways. And
Mm.
I've definitely seen people not like that.
Ah.
Honestly, I've had a couple of my editors, mention that I tend to write a little bit more unlikable heroines, which I
Ah.
take great pride in. But unfortunately, our readers, as romance readers, are still, I think, working through some of the misogynistic
Mm.
thoughts and experiences that we've had growing up, and internalized misogyny as well. So that is a criticism that we do get,
Mm-hmm.
and that we have to be careful of
Mm.
to obviously not alienate our readers. But I feel like my job is also to kind of guide the reader away from that thought and sort of more towards offering and embracing our female characters in all of their complexities. And that
Mm.
sometimes means that they are a little bit unlikable, as we all are, I think. There's no one universally liked. And
Mm.
I want to move away from the term unlikable and kind of settle on the term relatable, because I think we can all
Ah.
relate to someone who is, has a
Mm.
range of emotions and kind of shows their anger as much as their compassion, which I think Sophia is a really wonderful example of. So,
Mm.
but I've also, sorry, and just to say, I've also had people come to me and say that Sophia is one of their favorite characters for the same.
Ah.
So there's different a range of people who are gonna
Mm.
give you feedback, and you kind of just have to choose what you listen to.
Yeah, definitely. Um, okay, well, your books definitely pass the Bechdel test with your depiction of complex and interesting relationships between women, including family relationships and female friendships that have camaraderie, complications, and complexity, which, feel very real to many female readers. And for those who are watching who are not familiar with the Bechdel test, it basically asks whether a work, whether book, movie, TV series, etc., features at least two women talking to each other about something other than men. Now, Therese, what can you suggest for writers who want to write female conversations and relationships realistically, especially based on your, all the answers that you've given before?
This is something that I think about a lot when I go into my writing, because it's really hard in a romance to have your female characters talk about something outside of the romance, because the genre kind of expects that every scene is moving the
Mm,
romance forward.
yeah.
So obviously you'd expect a conversation to then in some ways deal with speaking about a man, or
Mm-hmm.
well, in male female romances, speaking about this man that you have an experience, you having this romantic experience with. But what I try to do is show that my female character is not only falling in love, but they are also discovering themselves through
Yes.
this process.
Mm,
So for me, it's really important that all of my characters, male and female, are ready for the relationship by the end of the book. I don't want,
mm,
essentially what I'm doing, and this is a joke I've made with my editor before, is I'm putting them through therapy in the book. I want to make sure that when my reader puts the book down,
yep.
they know that these two people are ready to be in a healthy relationship and move forward in a healthy way. And that
Mm,
means that they have to deal with their issues. They have to face those issues, and those issues are very often not romantic issues. So
mm,
for me, with my female characters in particular, they tend to have familial issues. For me, that's something that I find is common in a lot of people, that a lot
mm-hmm.
of your emotional baggage comes from your family. and from the way you grew up or your relationships in your past, romantic or
Mm.
not. And
Mm.
often that means that we should be dealing with that before we can have a healthy relationship. So that's kind of the advice that I would give, is to make sure that your characters are in a space where they are able to be in a healthy relationship, and they have to deal with all of their baggage, which is not necessarily romantic. So even in the romance genre, I think you can explore things that are outside of the main relationship, the main romantic relationship. And I think that's kind of how you try and do it, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've definitely noticed that personal development and progression in the characters when in the books of yours that I've read. So really enjoyed that, and it's not just the women, right? I mean, it's also the men. So and to shift the focus a bit, to the guys. So over the past 10 to 15 years, the hero in many romance books has significantly evolved, and we are seeing a far wider range of male supporting characters as well. Now, do you think that reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and toward complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways romance writers can break away from harmful tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Absolutely. I mean,
Mm,
and the reason I wanted to contextualize the extract that I read at the beginning is
mm,
because this book I think was my third book, as I mentioned, and it
yeah.
was right at the beginning of my career. I started writing when I got my publishing contract when I was 22 years old, and
Mm,
I was very young, and I think with my exposure to relationships was still very much um, sort of unconscious or subconscious. So
mm,
all of the tropes that I think I grew up on reading, where there was a lot more toxicity, was prevalent in what I was reading. So in that extract,
mm,
you'll see sort of the putting women against women, instead of in terms of how Lily thinks of herself in comparison to her ex-fiance's new fiance,
mm,
and the way that I'm representing her ex-fiance as well. And I'm not saying that that's wrong or that's something that I regret. I just know that since then I've really tried to be more intentional and think about what would I like the world to look like. And so for me,
mm,
I always want my romance novels to display hope and to be hopeful. And that's one of my favorite things about the romance genre, is that
mm,
regardless of what happens during the course of the book, at the end you know that they're going to be happy and live happily ever after, or
yep.
happily for now. But you sort of get that hopeful experience that people can put aside their own personal judgments and stereotypes, that they can grow and become better, and by the end of it that they'll be able to again pursue healthy relationships. And so what kind of evolved from this was trying to make sure that I was also displaying a range of masculinity, or in the
Mm,
specific context, the male, and of cis men, to make sure that, you know, the expectation I'm creating in my reader isn't also one dimensional, and sort of
wow. Mm,
really playing into those toxic tips that, of
mm,
the alpha
mm.
male and things. So I think for me, the number one thing that you'll find in the books, I've written 22 books now, you'll find kindness, which I find to be very important in my male romantic leads, particularly. And I like to challenge what people think and what my readers think. You'll find in your traditional hero, so there will be sort of, if they do partake in toxic behavior, the female character or the female romantic lead tends to challenge them, or by the end of it, they sort of realize, what, this is maybe not the best way that I can deal with this. And I think that as a society, we are, however, slowly it's happening, we are moving towards that space where we are encouraging males to experience a range of emotions, and,
Mm,
not be ashamed of feeling things like compassion and empathy and being kind. I think we are rewarding that over, this toxic alpha male idea
mhm.
that has been developed over the last previous generations. And so for me, that's really just what I want to do, is to make sure that with my readers, at least, that they can see that there are, different types of men, and that,
Mm,
this is possible, because I've experienced it. I'm in a relationship where my husband is very kind and very open
mm,
to being communicated with and communicating. And that's a journey that he and I have been on over years. So
mm,
I want to make sure that people know it's possible, and hopefully shift their expectations. So in their personal lives, they can also sort of have these ideas of what they can expect from men and what they deserve from men in normal uh, daily, like non-fiction, in their normal lives.
yes, in real life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've kind of let's continue expanding on like the genre, right? So the romance genre is the biggest selling genre today, but it has been criticized for being anti-feminist and as you kind of covered just now, of providing unrealistic portrayals of sexual and romantic relationships and of glorifying toxic relationships. However, your romances tend to be character driven, with both your main characters learning to deal with their personal issues and flaws on the way to finding their happily ever after, just like we were talking about earlier. Now, in your books, consent is a natural part of the evolving relationships, as it should be. However, the line between consent and coercion hasn't always been made clear in many romance books. Do you think that this is an issue that romance writers have started tackling successfully in recent years?
I think so. I think my opinion is very skewed, because the writers that
Mm,
I read and I tend
mm,
to gravitate towards definitely do.
ah,
And that's not a criticism of, other writers, but I've done a good job in my mind of curating my, favorite authors, to make sure that they are aware of the issues that I care about, and that's what is reflected in the books as well.
mm,
So I mean, I've seen, especially in sort of the newer romances, especially sort of in contemporary romance and those type of
mm,
things, that are, the genre that um, I think is probably the most well-known subgenre that's most well-known within romance. We are definitely seeing consent being treated
mm,
as an important issue, as a vital issue. And I think even in the darker romances, there's a thing called sort of consensual non-consent, which is where you have a conversation, you make sure that you and your romantic partner or partners are on the same page, so that within this one context of maybe your sexual encounters, that
mm,
when there's something that happens that you maybe find sexy or sort of more appealing, that it's within this particular um, situation. It's not throughout your
mhm,
relationship. So
mm,
even that, the fact that we have a term for it now, the fact that it's so prevalent, and I think the fact that readers want to see it,
mhm,
um, that's sort of what's more common these days, hopefully. And I'm
mm,
not talking about romantic fiction and sort of going outside of the romance genre, where I think we still see a lot of non-consent, and sort of
mm,
see it uplifted and sort of praised in ways that can make me personally a little bit uncomfortable.
mhm,
But I know within the romance genre and within my sort of authors that I tend to go to and read, that it's dealt with so well, and in appealing ways, because I know people tend to be worried about, is consent sexy, or why. But I think there's
mm,
nothing sexier, or for me at least, there's nothing sexier than someone taking your opinion into account and respecting you.
definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
that's true for the relationship itself, and also within the sexual context. It's so important to just feel respected. And so, I mean, obviously
Mm,
that's clearly my thing, but I've seen it enough that I think it's common with a lot of people.
yes, everybody should be on the same page about what they want to do to one another.
Yes, you would
Mm,
think that's kind of common knowledge, but it's not always.
mm, yeah.
I like to talk about it to make sure and the conversations my characters have as well is this okay with you? Can
Mm.
I do this? And it doesn't need to be verbal as well. I think I've written, sexier scenes where the characters pull away from one another, check body language, which is I think is a little
Mm.
bit harder, but I think if you know the person
Mm-hmm.
that you're engaging with, that kind of body language is also an important factor. So I mean, it doesn't have to be, are you okay with this? Can I do this? Or
Yeah,
sometimes just
checking in.
checking in.
Yeah. Oh, and you earlier you mentioned that sometimes when you read other genres, you can be a bit uncomfortable about how they treat this issue of consent, and to kind of like go with that, what do you think romance as a genre can teach other genres about writing about violence against women, sexism, and misogyny in stories?
I think a lot of it has to do with the agency of the female characters, and that's something that's important to me as a reader and writer of romance. I
Mm,
want to see your character choose and to come into her power, whether or not it's sort of in expected ways, sort of explicitly saying, I don't like this, or I don't want this, or choosing to leave a situation, but also in ways of, small things, kind of making sure that this is something she's comfortable with, that she's
mm,
okay with. And
mm,
honestly, I'm really proud of our genre because I think we do a lot of work when it comes to making sure that our female characters are well taken care of.
mm,
You'll see often sexual scenes specifically that are from the perspective of the female, and if it is well, I mean, obviously there's just as many that are in the male perspective, but in those situations, you will see how sort of a worshipy, no, that's not a word, how the hero kind of worships the heroine and how, beautiful and wonderful and, really respectfully,
mm,
he finds this experience. And I'm speaking specifically sexually because I think, we tend to see a lot of really difficult sexual scenes in other
mm,
genres because
mhm.
that seems to be a very common way that violence against women is shown.
Yes.
But also, obviously, this can deal with emotional abuse and
Mm,
psychological abuse and mental
mhm,
abuse. But when we are coming to a romance character, we are seeing that character specifically being dealt a different hand. So even if they have been abused in the past, within that book, they are moving
mhm,
outside of that. They are
mm,
trying to leave those situations, or they have left that situation. And I think that's
mm,
a very powerful thing for readers who are experiencing that to see as well, that there can be hope outside of a difficult toxic relationship. I know it simplifies it a lot, me saying it that way, and I know it's not easy to just leave a situation, but I do think the hope that
mm,
there is more and that there is better is really
mm,
important to show. And that even if you have a situation where um, the 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 reality of life is shown, that there is hope that it gets better. And I think that hope is the most important thing that we can show in within our genre, and the power that it takes, the strength that it takes to eventually get there to that hopeful situation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, stories for sure are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about change. And but in your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about tough human rights issues like violence against women and telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy? So yeah, that's the thing.
I mean, I try to do in my book is by focusing on the characters, right, and not
Mm,
the issues. So, if your character does have an important social issue that they are dealing with, to see it from a real, relatable, personable experience versus sort of a preaching way of showing it. Because I think if you don't show a character actually engaging with that situation and dealing with it, or
mm,
you show a third party kind of saying this is what you should be doing in this situation, or this
mhm,
is what actually happening, you are doing the issue a disservice, and dealing with the issue you are definitely not sort of actually engaging with. But if you have someone saying, you know what, this is an issue that we are dealing with, this is an issue that I've dealt with, and I'm going through, and have them work through it and engage with it, I think that kind of naturally you end up making this issue more personable and more relatable than if you'd sort of just told someone a story
Mm,
about how they should get out of it, or had that sort of experience. It's a very difficult thing, I think, because
yeah.
sometimes you do kind of have a character who does end up being um a peachy character. I mean, I'm sure I've written books like that. But what I try to do is to make sure that it's always coming from an emotionally authentic and sincere place, and that the character's actually engaging with it and then sort of moving forward.
Mm, cool. And time has passed so fast. We're nearly at the end of our session. But let me pivot a bit. And as we mentioned earlier, you have two boys, and parents are usually the most influential role models in a person's life. As a mom, what do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations, and to get boys involved in helping to do so?
Um, it's such a difficult thing. I think indeed, I particularly find it very challenging to raise. I have two sons, and
Mm,
to raise them in the world today, because I find the world to not be a very nice place.
mm,
Even in all the good things and the positive things, which I think we all have, and we've all experienced and see. I'm also very aware of um, how difficult it is, and how certain social structures that we grow up in can affect boys and girls and non-binary people. And so for me, it's first and foremost, the most important thing is to educate myself as the
mhm,
parent, to make sure that I'm aware of my behavior. How am I encouraging or reinforcing certain stereotypes? How am I engaging with my children in ways that could potentially lead to certain consequences? How am I
mm,
treating myself? How am I and my husband engaging with one another? So I've been very intentional about that. I mean, I go to therapy and sort of talk about these things with my therapist, like, how am I going to deal with this particular situation when they are 15 years old, like they're two. So
yeah.
it's really far off, but that's kind of what I found to be helpful for myself, so that as they grow up, I can teach them and hopefully be that support system for them. My hope
Mm,
with my children is that I can raise aware and responsible and conscious, intentional children. I
mm,
particularly hope for my boys that they grow up in a world where they engage with society in a critical way. So they are making sure that they think about the way they treat people, and especially women, and people of other genders, minorities in particular, because the world, in my opinion, has been designed for with the patriarchy in mind,
mm,
with men in
mm,
positions of power. So it's very much skewed to the male experience. I would love for my children to think about the other side, and to think about how they are treating women. And my hope is that I can raise them in a way that they do that, and that it starts with me. And a lot of that comes from the engagement that my husband and I have with one another. And so he and I speak a lot about, how are we treating each other? How are we treating them? How are we raising them? Are we making sure that they are, healthy, emotionally content and engaged little boys? And so that's what I hope to do. But it's really difficult. I think it's such a constant thing, because you yourself have been raised in that world that
yeah.
is maybe not designed for you, or is just the experience is expected in some ways. So I want to make sure that we can do that. And I think the first step, like I said, is to make sure that you are aware of where you stand in it and how you can help, and
Mm.
sort of challenge what you've been taught.
I think that's really great advice.
I hope so. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm doing it well. I'm really just trying to really raise boys that are, you know,
Yeah.
that are good people. And I think
Mm.
that's what it comes down to today is good people who think of other people and the way that they treat other people.
Yeah, definitely. And for our final question, you have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti violence against women work as a whole. This may seem a bit obvious, and there are two parts to this question. So, firstly, why do you support the cause to end violence against women? And secondly, what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
I mean, it does seem like an obvious thing, but obviously it's not. I live in South Africa, as we mentioned, where
Mm,
domestic violence and gender-based violence is such a prevalent issue that it's regularly spoken about by our politicians, and it's actually one of those issues that the when our president addresses um, the nation, and it's actually one of those things that he brings up, and he's like, okay, we all need to deal with this, and we have to be
mm,
aware of this things. And I think the importance of it is just to understand that women are people.
mhm,
I don't know how else to explain that. Is that I can't imagine treating someone as unkindly. And I mean, that's a very tame word to explain what violence against women is. But to disrespect someone so much that you think it's okay to treat them as lesser than, because that's essentially
mm,
what it is. And obviously,
mm,
there's a lot of psychology behind abuse and violence against women. But I do think it's so important to understand that we are all human beings, and women have feelings and thoughts and are just as important as a man. They have power and should
mm,
have the same power, um, and they're not lesser than simply because of gender, which I think
mm,
is true of all minorities. But particularly in this case, that's so important. So I think once we start thinking about women as people, start understanding that all people deserve respect and kindness and to be seen and to be treated in ways that are not it's, like I said, it's such a tame word, but the kind of comes down to me is unkind, and to just think of them
mm,
as there, because I can't imagine not being a kind person or being someone who respects other people and doing this. It's obviously wrong, and it's obviously not what we'd like for anyone to go through,
mm,
regardless of gender, and particularly vulnerable women, because we are vulnerable in the society that we've grown up in and that we are raised, and the way we've been socialized. Women are particularly vulnerable.
mm,
So to think of that, and I think in terms of authors, I think it's to be aware of how we are portraying women and men. I
mhm,
think in romance in particular is, are we showing male characters or male main characters who are engaging with their interactions, who are thinking about their interactions? Are we dealing with women who are thinking and engaging with interactions regardless of what
mm,
they are? Because I think once we are just aware of what we're writing, which, like I said, was an experience that I went through personally, is to
mm,
start becoming more intentional and thinking, is this what I'd want my
mm,
sons and daughters to read one day? Is this what I want to put out in the world? So that one
mm,
day, they can grow up and see an experience that is similar, hopefully, to their own in strength and in hope.
mm,
So I think as authors, we actually have a big responsibility, because people turn to romance in particular for hope and a good time.
mm,
I would like to think that we take that responsibility seriously, and we actually move forward and are thoughtful and kind. It really comes down to kindness to me. I know it's so silly, but I just think if we can write characters who are empathetic, um, and show that, even if we show uncomfortable experiences, even if we show the realities of the world that we are living in, that eventually we get to a point where we can engage with that critically and
mm.
show a hopeful outcome. I don't know. Does that answer your question? I hope so.
It definitely has, in a way. Hi, everyone. This is me, the voice on the off show. Thank you so much, Therese, for the excellent sessions and those really great answers. So, to those of you watching, in case you missed the start of today's show, we're excited to let you know that Therese has not only generously spent her time here with us today, but she has also donated a few super exclusive goodies to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. They are Therese Beharrie's Ultimate Paranormal Romance Bundle, and this is one very special bundle to one generous donor in the United States only, and it is one unsigned paperback of And They Lived Happily Ever After, and there you can see it. One unsigned paperback of A Ghost in Shining Armor. There we go. One handwritten and signed personalized note to the donor. And do note that as Therese lives in South Africa, where postal services are a bit unreliable, she'll be scanning the note and sending it to her editor in the US to print out to send to the donor together with the books. And one bonus story about the couple, Gaia Anders and Jacob Scott from And They Live Happily Ever After. That one. And the second bundle, this is a ebook starter bundle available to donors, one donor anywhere in the world. And this is a great set if you want to get a taste of Therese's writing or you want to introduce someone to her work. It is her One Day to Forever series, which includes A Wedding One Christmas, one there we go, One Day to Fall. Those are the paperbacks. You're getting the ebook,
Yes.
and
Yes.
One Last Chance. There. All these titles will be available to you in an EPUB format. There are also plenty more goodies available from authors and publishers, including Angela Yuriko Smith, Adiba Jagidar, Carol Goodman, Liana Renee Haber, Romina Garber, Entangled Publishing, and more. New goodies will be released every Friday throughout this month. Please do give generously before the fundraiser ends in April next month. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. And let me share a slide here. There we go. So you can donate to get these goodies on RallyUp at tinyurl.com/R4P RallyUp IWD 2023. Please be careful about the caps as it is case sensitive. And if you want to learn more about Read for Pixels, you can go to bit.ly/Read for Pixels. Now, the Pixel Project's first charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due, where the Twilight Zone meets promising young women, was a finalist in the 2021 Shirley Jackson Awards and is currently a finalist in the Audie Awards 2023. It is available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook editions. The ebook and paperback versions are available for order from major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Barnes& Noble, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and other major booksellers worldwide. Additionally, we have teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors to offer an exclusive limited edition anthology bookplate for paperback buyers. Each author will sign 16 bookplates and it'll be on a first come, first served basis. And each bookplate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. For more information about the anthology and how to score a bookplate, visit bit.ly/giving the devil his due. And here is our audiobook. The audiobook version is available from Audible, Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Kobo, Chirp, and other major audiobook retailers worldwide. Plus, as a bonus, for Women's History Month and International Women's Day this March, the audiobook is going to be offered for a special price of $8 from March 8 to 18 on all these retailers. So do go and get it quick during this time. For more information about the audiobook, visit tinyurl.com/GTDHD audiobook R4P. All net proceeds go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives, such as Read for Pixels, alive and kicking. And to find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. Now, Therese, I believe you have an announcement for us?
Yes, I have a new book coming out in June, which is called The Single Dads Club, which, let's see, maybe the side. And I think this actually does a really good job of showing you how I write my male characters, because it's about a father who unexpectedly becomes a single father and has to grapple with raising a child after a difficult childhood himself, and sort of being folded into a really wonderful community that props him up and shows him how to deal with fatherhood in a really, I think, hopefully emotionally mature way. And as he obviously does that, he falls in love with an ex-heiress who has a past of her own that she's trying to overcome. And I think this does a really good job of showing different kinds of masculinity and hopefully challenges that as well. So a
Yeah,
single dance club, um, which is
watch
out
out
in
for
June.
that. Yes, watch out for that late in June. Well, thank you once again, Therese, and thank you to everyone out there watching. Have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.